Learn English through the story of Alexander the Great. Chapter 1. The Boy Who Would Be King. In the land of Macedonia, a boy was born in 356 BC. His name was Alexander, son of King Philip II. From a young age, Alexander was curious and brave. He loved stories of heroes like Achilles and Hercules. His father, King Philip, was a strong and clever ruler. Philip wanted to make Macedonia the greatest kingdom. Alexander watched his father lead armies and win battles. He dreamed of one day becoming a great leader, too. Alexander's mother, Queen Olympias, told him he was special. She said he was the son of Zeus, the king of the gods. This made Alexander believe he was destined for greatness. He wanted to prove himself to his father and the world. When Alexander was 13, his father hired a famous teacher. His name was Aristotle, one of the wisest men in Greece. Aristotle taught Alexander about science, philosophy, and art. Alexander loved learning and carried books everywhere. Alexander also learned to fight and ride horses. He tamed a wild horse named Bucephalus when he was young. This impressed his father, who said Macedonia was too small for him. Alexander knew he was meant for bigger things. But not everything was easy for Alexander. His parents often fought, and their marriage was unhappy. Alexander felt caught between his strong-willed mother and father. He learned to be strong and independent because of this. When Alexander was 19, his father was assassinated. The kingdom was in chaos and enemies threatened Macedonia. Alexander acted quickly to secure his place as king. He proved he was a leader by defeating his enemies. With the kingdom united, Alexander looked to the future. He remembered his father's dream of conquering Persia. Alexander knew it was his destiny to lead this great campaign. The boy who would be king was ready to become a legend. Chapter 2. The Beginning of a Legend. Alexander stood before his army, his eyes filled with determination. He was only 21, but his soldiers believed in him. They knew he was not just a king, but a warrior. Alexander promised them glory and a place in history. His first goal was to unite all the Greek city-states. Some resisted, but Alexander was both firm and fair. He showed them the strength of Macedonia's army. Soon, Greece was under his control, ready for the next step. In 334 BC, Alexander led his army across the Hellespont. This narrow strip of water separated Europe from Asia. As they landed, Alexander threw his spear into the ground. He declared that Asia would be won by the spear. The first major battle was at the Granicus River. The Persian army waited on the other side, ready to fight. Alexander did not hesitate. He charged straight into the river. His bravery inspired his soldiers, and they followed without fear. The battle was fierce, but Alexander's tactics were brilliant. He led his cavalry in a daring attack on the Persian leaders. The Persians were caught off guard and began to retreat. Alexander's victory at Granicus was the first of many. After the battle, Alexander visited the city of Troy. He paid respects to Achilles, his hero from the stories. Alexander believed he was following in Achilles' footsteps. He wanted to be remembered as a hero of his time. As they marched further into Persia, Alexander faced challenges. The land was vast, and the Persian army was still strong. But Alexander's soldiers trusted him completely. They knew he would lead them to victory no matter what. One day, Alexander received news of a large Persian force. King Darius III himself was leading the army at Issus. Alexander did not fear the Persian king. He saw an opportunity. He prepared his men for what would be a legendary battle. The two armies met at Issus, a narrow plain by the sea. Alexander's army was smaller, but they were well trained. He used the terrain to his advantage, trapping the Persians. The battle was chaotic, but Alexander's plan worked perfectly. Darius fled the battlefield, leaving his family behind. Alexander captured Darius's mother, wife, and children, but instead of harming them, he treated them with respect. This act of kindness surprised many, even his enemies. With the victory at Issus, Alexander's legend grew. People began to see him as more than just a conqueror. He was a leader who could inspire both fear and admiration. The beginning of his legend was just the start of his journey. Chapter 3: The Conquest of Persia. After the victory at Issus, Alexander's confidence grew. He knew the Persian Empire was vast, but he was determined. His army marched south along the coast, capturing cities. Each victory brought him closer to his ultimate goal. One of the most important cities was Tyre, an island fortress. The people of Tyre believed their city was unconquerable. Alexander was not discouraged. He saw it as a challenge. He ordered his men to build a causeway to reach the island. For 7 months, Alexander's army worked tirelessly. They faced attacks from Tyre's navy and walls. But Alexander's persistence paid off in the end. When the causeway was complete, his army stormed the city. The fall of Tyre sent a message to the rest of the world. No city, no matter how strong, could stand against Alexander. He continued his march, heading toward Egypt. The Egyptians welcomed him as a liberator, not a conqueror. In Egypt, Alexander was crowned pharaoh, a god-king. He founded a new city on the coast and named it Alexandria. This city would become one of the greatest in the ancient world. Alexander's vision was not just to conquer, but to build. With Egypt secure, Alexander turned his attention back to Persia. He knew the final showdown with Darius was coming. Darius had gathered a massive army at Gaugamela. This would be the battle that decided the fate of the empire. Alexander's army marched through the desert to reach Gaugamela. They were outnumbered, but Alexander was not afraid. He spent the night before the battle planning his strategy. His soldiers trusted him, knowing he would lead them to victory. The battle began at dawn, with the Persian army charging first. Alexander stayed calm, waiting for the right moment to strike. He led his cavalry in a daring attack on Darius's position. The Persian king panicked and fled the battlefield once again. With Darius gone, the Persian army fell into chaos. Alexander's forces pushed forward, securing a decisive victory. The Battle of Gaugamela was a turning point in history. The Persian Empire was now in Alexander's hands. Alexander marched into Babylon, one of Persia's greatest cities. The people welcomed him as their new king. He respected their traditions and treated them with kindness. This made it easier for him to rule such a vast empire. But Alexander's journey was far from over. He knew there were still lands to explore and conquer. His ambition drove him forward, even as his soldiers grew tired. The conquest of Persia was just one chapter in his epic story. Chapter 4. The Edge of the World. With Persia under his control, Alexander looked to the east. He had heard stories of lands no Greek had ever seen. These lands were full of mystery, riches, and danger. Alexander wanted to explore them and expand his empire. His army marched through the rugged mountains of Central Asia. The journey was long and difficult, but Alexander led the way. He shared the hardships with his soldiers, earning their loyalty. Together, they faced harsh weather and unfamiliar terrain. In one region, Alexander met a fierce warrior queen. Her name was Roxana, and she was as brave as she was beautiful. Alexander was impressed by her courage and intelligence. They fell in love and married, uniting their people. As they moved further east, Alexander's army grew weary. They had been fighting and marching for years without rest, but Alexander's ambition pushed them forward. He believed they were close to the edge of the world. Finally, they reached the borders of India. The land was lush and green, unlike anything they had seen. Alexander was eager to conquer this new territory, but his soldiers were tired and wanted to return home. The Indian king, Porus, was a formidable opponent. He had a large army and trained war elephants. Alexander knew this battle would be one of his toughest, but he was confident in his strategy and his men. The two armies met at the Hydaspes River. Alexander used clever tactics to cross the river at night. He surprised Porus's forces and attacked at dawn. The battle was fierce, with elephants charging into the fray. Despite the chaos, Alexander's army fought bravely. They managed to defeat Porus and capture the king. Alexander was impressed by Porus's courage and dignity. He allowed Porus to keep his kingdom as an ally. But the victory at Hydaspes came at a cost. Alexander's soldiers were exhausted and homesick. They had followed him to the edge of the known world. Now they begged him to turn back and return to Greece. Alexander was torn between his dreams and his men's pleas. He wanted to push further into India, but he couldn't ignore them. Reluctantly, he agreed to begin the journey home. It was a difficult decision, but he knew his soldiers' limits. As they turned back, Alexander felt a sense of loss. He had come so far, but had not reached the edge of the world. Still, his journey had changed the course of history. He had brought Greek culture to lands no one had imagined. The march back was slow and filled with challenges. They crossed deserts, mountains, and rivers once again. Alexander's health began to suffer from the strain, but his spirit remained unbroken, even as his body weakened. When they finally reached Babylon, Alexander was celebrated. He had created one of the largest empires in history. But his journey was not over. He had more plans. Alexander the Great was always looking for the next horizon. Chapter 5. The End of the Journey. Alexander returned to Babylon, the heart of his empire. He was greeted as a hero, but he was not at peace. There were still lands to conquer and plans to fulfill. He dreamed of exploring Arabia and even reaching the West. But his body was tired after years of constant campaigning. The wounds from battles and the strain of leadership took a toll. Alexander ignored the signs, focusing on his next goals. He began preparing for a new campaign to Arabia. One evening, after a long day of planning, Alexander fell ill. At first, it seemed like a simple fever, but it grew worse. His friends and generals gathered around him, worried. They prayed for his recovery, but his condition did not improve. For days, Alexander lay in bed growing weaker. He spoke to his loyal soldiers, thanking them for their service. He told them to stay united and continue his vision. Even in his final moments, Alexander thought of his empire. On June 10, 323 BC, Alexander the Great passed away. He was only 32 years old, but he had achieved so much. His death left a void that no one could fill. The empire he built began to fracture without his leadership. Alexander's generals fought for control of his vast lands. They divided the empire among themselves, creating new kingdoms. Ptolemy took Egypt, Seleucus ruled Persia, and others took parts of Greece. The unity Alexander had created was lost, but his legacy remained. Today, Alexander the Great is still remembered as a legend. His name is synonymous with leadership and vision. Though his empire did not last, his impact on the world did. Alexander's journey may have ended, but his story lives on. And so, the tale of Alexander the Great comes to a close. A boy from Macedonia who became a king, a conqueror, and a legend. His life reminds us that even the smallest beginnings can lead to greatness. Alexander's name will forever echo in the halls of history. Now, we'd love to hear from you. Do you think Alexander the Great was a hero or a conqueror? Was he a visionary leader or someone who wanted too much? Let us know your opinion in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories. Keep practicing your English, and we'll see you in the next video.